The humid August air hung heavy over the meticulously planned community of Willow Creek, a suffocating blanket that seemed to mirror the oppressive atmosphere within its cul-de-sacs. Lawns stretched like emerald carpets, identical mailboxes stood at attention, and every window gleamed with the reflection of an unspoken, rigid conformity. Alex Miller had bought into the dream. The quiet streets, the top-rated schools, the promise of a safe haven for his wife, Sarah, and their 7-year-old daughter, Lily. He hadn't realized the dream came with an iron fist, wielded by the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. It started subtly, as most insidious things do. A politely worded notice about a slightly overgrown rosebush, then a fine for a forgotten trash can on collection day. Alex, a man who believed in order but cherished personal freedom, grumbled but complied. He was a civil engineer, a man of logic and structure, accustomed to blueprints and regulations. But these rules felt different, personal, arbitrary. The real trouble began with the old oak tree. It stood majestically in their backyard, a gnarled sentinel that had watched generations pass, its sprawling branches offering shade and solace. Lily had built her fantastical forts beneath its canopy, and Sarah painted its vibrant autumn leaves every year. It was their tree, their little piece of untamed nature in a world obsessed with uniformity. Then came the letter from Mrs. Albright, the HOA president. Her signature, a spidery scrawl, was almost as chilling as the contents. The tree, it claimed, was violating the newly revised Architectural and Landscaping Covenants, Article 4, Section B, Subsection 3, Native Flora Requirements. Specifically, its root system, according to a recent unannounced inspection, was deemed a potential hazard to the community's shared underground drainage infrastructure, and its branches, though pruned regularly by Alex, were encroaching upon the stipulated aesthetic sightlines. The directive was clear: remove the tree, or at minimum have it professionally assessed and significantly cut back, with all costs and liability borne by the homeowner. Alex felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Remove it? That's insane, he muttered to Sarah, holding the letter aloft. It's been here for 50 years, probably more. It predates Willow Creek. Sarah, usually the calm to his storm, looked genuinely worried. They've been cracking down, Alex. Remember the Johnsons and their satellite dish? They fought it for months, then just gave up and moved. Alex wasn't the type to give up. He consulted the original deeds, the old survey maps. The tree was well within their property lines, and there was no mention of specific flora requirements in the initial covenants he'd signed. He even called a local arborist, who confirmed the tree was healthy, its roots posing no immediate threat, and its branches safely clear of any power lines. He drafted a polite but firm letter to Mrs. Albright, attaching copies of his deeds, the arborist's report, and even old photographs showing the tree thriving long before the current HOA board took power. He expected a dialogue, a negotiation. What he got was another letter. Not from Mrs. Albright, but from the HOA's legal firm, Sterling and Gray, LLC. It was curt, formal, and threatening. It accused him of non-compliance, of ignoring reasonable requests, and stated that if the tree wasn't removed or heavily pruned within 30 days, they would levy a daily fine of $500, place a lien on his property, and pursue further legal action to enforce the covenant, including seeking reimbursement for all legal fees. The cost of their lawyers alone, even for this initial letter, was enough to make Alex's head spin. This is extortion, Alex fumed, pacing the living room. Lily, sensing the tension, hid behind Sarah's legs. They don't care about the tree. They just want to show who's boss. Or worse, there's something else. He remembered whispers from older residents, rumors of land disputes years ago before the current developer bought out all the original homesteads. Whispers of a forgotten stream that once ran through what was now the common parkland, prone to flooding. He'd dismissed them as local folklore, But now, a chilling thought began to take root. Was the tree somehow connected to something Mrs. Albright and the HOA wanted to keep buried? He tried to contact other residents. Most were too afraid, whispering concerns behind closed doors, but unwilling to openly challenge Mrs. Albright. A few had tried, only to be crushed by fines, legal threats, or social ostracism. Mrs. Albright, a former corporate litigator with a steely gaze and an unnerving ability to find loopholes, ran the HOA like a personal fiefdom. Her inner circle, equally rigid and rule-bound, acted as her enforcers. The days ticked by. Alex researched zoning laws, environmental protections, property rights. He found nothing definitive that could help him legally without years of costly litigation. The tree became more than just a tree. It became a symbol of his last stand. One evening, after Lily was asleep, Alex stared out at the silhouette of the oak against the moonlit sky. Sarah sat beside him, her hand gripping his. "What are we going to do, Alex? We can't afford those fines. And a lien. It'll ruin us." "I know," he said, his voice a low growl. He was exhausted, but a new, dangerous idea was forming, a desperate one. "I don't think this is about the tree anymore. I think they're trying to cover something up, something about the land itself." Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "The drainage infrastructure," he mused, recalling Mrs. Albright's letter. "It's new." But there were old systems, natural runoff paths, even a small creek before this place was developed. What if something from that era is still here? Something they don't want exposed? He remembered an old man, Mr. Henderson, who lived 2 streets over, a veritable walking encyclopedia of Willow Creek's past. He'd always talked about a cursed well and a diverted flow. The next morning, Alex woke with a grim determination. He drove to the hardware store, bypassing the lawn and garden section, heading straight for the industrial tools. A heavy-duty shovel, a pickaxe, a ground penetration radar unit he'd rented on a hunch. Sarah watched him load the tools into the truck, a silent plea in her eyes. "Alex, what are you doing?" "I'm digging," he stated, his jaw set. "If they want to claim my property as a hazard, if they want to threaten my family over a tree, then I'll show them what a real hazard looks like. I'll expose their truth, whatever it is." He started in a corner of the backyard, far from the house, near the property line closest to the community's disputed common area. He used the ground penetration radar first, slowly sweeping the device across the yard, watching the screen for anomalies. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for, but he trusted his engineer's intuition. The arborist said the oak's roots were fine. Mrs. Albright's sudden obsession with drainage infrastructure felt like a smokescreen. The radar hummed, projecting faint, cryptic patterns on its small screen. Most of it was undisturbed earth, a scattering of small rocks, and the deep, pervasive network of the oak's roots, just as the arborist had described. But then, near the boundary, where his property met the shared green belt that snaked through Willow Creek, a different pattern emerged. A consistent straight line, almost too uniform to be natural. It was deeper than any modern utility line should be, and it wasn't registered on any municipal maps. He started digging there. The rhythmic plunge of the shovel into the sun-baked earth, a primal act of defiance. The first day, he hit nothing but compacted soil and stubborn roots. Sweat plastered his shirt to his back, and his muscles screamed, but he pushed on. He wasn't looking for gold, he was looking for truth. The second day, the sun beat down relentlessly. He was 5 feet deep, a growing trench dissecting his once pristine lawn. Lily, usually playing happily in the yard, watched him from the patio, a worried frown on her face. Sarah brought him water, her silence heavy with unspoken fear. Around noon, a sleek black SUV, Mrs. Albright's, glided to a halt at the curb in front of their house. She emerged, a tall, severe woman in a pristine white pantsuit, her silver, hair pulled back in a tight bun, Her eyes, magnified by expensive glasses, scanned the digging with undisguised contempt. Behind her, two other HOA board members, Mr. Davies and Ms. Chen, stood like silent sentinels, their faces equally disapproving. "Mr. Miller," Mrs. Albright's voice cut through the stillness like a shard of ice. "What precisely do you think you are doing?" Alex straightened up, his back aching, his hands calloused. He leaned on the shovel, dirt clinging to his work boots. "Exercising my rights, Mrs. Albright, or perhaps identifying the potential hazard to the community's shared underground drainage infrastructure you so graciously alerted me to." His voice was low, laced with sarcasm. Her lip curled. "This is an unauthorized excavation, Mr. Miller. It is a clear violation of Article 7, subsection D, which explicitly prohibits any significant alteration of property landscaping without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Board. You are destroying your lawn, creating a public nuisance, and potentially damaging subsurface utilities." "I'm not damaging anything," Alex retorted, gesturing to his radar unit. "And I'm certainly not creating a public nuisance. I'm on my own property." "Your property, Mr. Miller," Mrs. Albright said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is subject to the covenants you signed, and these excavations, they will cease immediately, or we will be forced to take more drastic measures." Drastic measures? The brass plaque, heavy and cold in Alex's hand, felt less like an archaeological find and more like a live grenade. Its simple, stark inscription, "Property of Willow Creek Sanitarium, restricted area, do not disturb. Eastern boundary. Marker, 1928, shattered the carefully constructed reality of Willow Creek. The perfectly manicured lawns and identical homes now seemed to shimmer with a sinister, hidden past. Officer Reynolds, his hand still hovering over his holstered weapon, stared down into the trench, his brow furrowed in confusion. Officer Davies, a step behind him, squinted, trying to make out the words on the unearthed marker. The tension, thick as the humid air, shifted from Alex's defiance to the inexplicable object in his grasp. Mrs. Albright, however, offered no such confusion. Her face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated horror. The triumph had drained from her features, leaving behind a pallor that made her look years older. Her lips trembled, forming silent, panicked words. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, darted between Alex, the plaque, and the undisturbed ground where her precious green belt began. It was a look of someone whose most carefully guarded secret had just been ripped violently into the light. "What? What is that?" Officer Reynolds finally asked, his voice low, losing its earlier edge of authority. Alex, still kneeling in the dirt, held up the plaque, turning it so both officers could see. "This, officer, is what she didn't want me to find. This is the potential hazard to the drainage infrastructure she was so worried about." He cast a scathing look at Mrs. Albright. "This is a boundary marker from 1928 for something called the Willow Creek Sanitarium." A beat of stunned silence followed. Officer Reynolds slowly lowered his hand from his holster. Officer Davies pulled out her phone, looking as though she was about to start an immediate search. Mrs. Albright found her voice then, a strangled, desperate rasp. It's nothing. An old relic. A meaningless piece of junk. He's crazy, officers. This changes nothing. He's still trespassing, still violating rules, still digging an unauthorized hole on private property." Her voice grew louder, shriller, bordering on hysterical, but it lacked its former imperious command. It was the frantic plea of a cornered animal. "On my private property, Mrs. Albright," Alex corrected, climbing out of the trench, the plaque still clutched firmly. His eyes, though weary, burned with a new fire. "And I think this meaningless piece of junk might just explain why you were so desperate to get me to remove my tree. What exactly is under this green belt, Mrs. Albright?" What are you so afraid of being disturbed? Officer Reynolds, clearly uncomfortable, held up a hand. All right, everyone calm down. Mrs. Albright, your complaint was about property damage and safety. This is something else entirely. He looked at Alex. Mr. Miller, I'm not saying you're wrong, but you can't just go digging up your yard without permits. Permits for finding historical artifacts? Alex countered, a wry, bitter smile touching his lips. Or permits for exposing a decades-old cover-up. Officer Davies, who had been quietly tapping on her phone, looked up, her expression changing to one of dawning alarm. Willow Creek Sanitarium. There's a historical record of a facility by that name. It was decommissioned in the 1950s after allegations of questionable practices. It's listed as having been on the original parcel of land that this community was built on. She looked at Mrs. Albright with newfound suspicion. It also says its precise boundaries were never fully reconciled during the development land acquisition. Mrs. Albright let out a small, terrified gasp. Mr. Davies and Ms. Chen, who had been observing the scene silently, exchanged worried glances. The meticulously crafted facade of Willow Creek was cracking, exposing the grim reality beneath. All right, Officer Reynolds said, taking charge again, though his tone was noticeably less accusatory towards Alex. Mr. Miller, I need you to fill this hole for now. We'll take this plaque as evidence. Mrs. Albright, we're going to need to ask you some questions down at the station. This is no longer just an HOA dispute. This is something else. He didn't specify what something else was, but the unspoken implication hung heavy in the air, a potential historical cover-up, possibly even something criminal, given the sanitarium's dark reputation. Mrs. Albright, her usual composure, utterly shattered, could only stammer. But the tree! He's still in violation. The tree can wait, ma'am, Officer Reynolds said, his gaze firm. Right now, we need to understand what this means. Officer Davies, please secure the plaque and get the details of the nearest property line from Mr. Miller. As Officer Davies carefully took the plaque, Alex felt a strange mix of exhaustion and vindication. He'd risked everything, and he'd found something far bigger than a tree dispute. Sarah rushed over as the officers escorted a shell-shocked Mrs. Albright and her equally stunned cohorts to their SUV. Alex, are you okay? What happened? What did you find? Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and awe as she looked from the trench to the retreating police cars. Alex pulled her into a tired hug. I found the truth, Sarah, or at least the beginning of it. He gestured to the spot where the plaque had been. This land isn't just a housing development. It's built on top of something sinister. That evening, the Miller household was a whirlwind of hushed conversations and frantic research. Alex, fueled by adrenaline, was already online, cross-referencing Old Town records, property maps, and obscure historical society archives. Sarah, her initial fear replaced by a fierce protectiveness, helped him, her laptop open to old newspaper databases. Lily, blessedly unaware of the full implications, was glued to the TV, though she kept glancing at the filled-in patch in the backyard, her innocent mind curious about her dad's sudden digging adventure, the Willow Creek Sanitarium. What they uncovered was chilling. Established in 1910, it was initially a reputable institution for mental health treatment. But by the 1940s, rumors of patient abuse, unethical experiments, and suspicious deaths began to surface. It was finally shut down in 1956, amidst a flurry of lawsuits and a state investigation that remained largely inconclusive due to lack of sufficient evidence. The land was then bought by a series of shell corporations, eventually consolidated by the current developer Evergreen Holdings in the early 2000s, who then founded Willow Creek. Look at this, Sarah whispered, pointing to an old digitized newspaper article from 1957. It says the state inquiry was hampered by missing records and a mysteriously destroyed wing of the facility. And then This tiny paragraph. Unconfirmed reports of unmarked graves on the property were dismissed as sensationalism by the property owners at the time. Alex felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Unmarked graves. And his backyard sat on what was once the eastern boundary of that property. The green belt and the drainage infrastructure, he muttered. What if they're not just covering up history, Sarah? What if they're covering up a cemetery? The thought was horrifying. It explained Mrs. Albright's terror, her desperate shoot if they resist order. She wasn't just protecting property values. She was protecting a secret that could destroy Willow Creek, expose a monumental injustice, and potentially land the HOA board and perhaps even the original developers in deep legal trouble. The next day brought the predictable backlash. No fines, not yet. But the whispers began. Not just about Alex's unauthorized digging, but about his mental instability, his delusions of conspiracy. The HOA's social machinery, normally used for enforcing lawn care, now swung into full vicious action against him. Neighbors who once smiled now averted their gazes. Playdates for Lily were subtly canceled. Their mail was delivered late. Their trash cans inexplicably moved. It was a soft, insidious campaign of isolation and intimidation. Alex didn't care. He had the plaque, and the police had it too. He knew Mrs. Albright was talking to her lawyers. He needed more. He needed concrete proof, historical context. He remembered Mr. Henderson, the old man who talked about the cursed well and diverted flow. He was a long shot, but he was Alex's only lead into the pre-Willow Creek era. Alex drove to Mr. Henderson's small, slightly overgrown house, the only one on the street that dared to deviate from the HOA's rigid aesthetic. An old pickup. Truck sat in the driveway, covered in a fine layer of dust. Mr. Henderson, a wiry man with bright, intelligent eyes and a shock of white hair, greeted him from his porch swing. He looked exactly like the kind of person who knew all the secrets of Willow Creek. "Mr. Miller, isn't it?" Henderson said, his voice raspy. "Heard you made quite the ruckus yesterday. Police and Mrs. Albright, eh? Not many folks stand up to that woman." He gestured to a worn wooden chair. "Sit. Sounds like you've got a story." Alex told him everything about the tree, the fines, the digging, the plaque, the sanitarium, research. Henderson listened, his eyes twinkling, occasionally nodding. When Alex finished, Henderson leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Willow Creek Sanitarium, you say?" "Knew it. Knew something was rotten under all this shiny newness." He pointed vaguely towards the common area. "That green belt they're so proud of used to be the sanatorium's grounds and the eastern boundary, right by where your oak tree stands, if I recall. Old maps show it." "You have old maps?" Alex asked, a surge of hope rising within him. Henderson chuckled. "Oh, I got a lot more than maps, son. My granddaddy, he was a groundskeeper there for a spell. Back in the old survey map from Mr. Henderson was Alex's new blueprint. He spread it out on the dining table, its brittle paper a stark contrast to the gleaming modern finishes of his home. Sarah sat beside him, tracing the faded lines with a trembling finger. The section marked Undisturbed Earth, former cemetery plot, stretched ominously across not just their property line, but a significant portion of the HOA's prized green belt and into the community park. "This is it," Alex murmured, his voice grim. "This is why the tree had to go. Not because of drainage, but because its roots were anchoring the soil, keeping whatever's down there. And the new drainage system," Sarah added, connecting the dots. "It's not just for water, is it? It's a containment system to prevent anything from surfacing." The horrifying implications hung heavy in the air. Bodies, unmarked graves, and an entire suburban community built on top, deliberately kept ignorant by the very people sworn to protect their interests. The sheer audacity of it, the callous disregard for human dignity, made Alex's blood run cold. Their initial strategy was to go through official channels. Alex painstakingly compiled a dossier, copies of the old survey map, his research on the Willow Creek Sanitarium, the historical articles Sarah had found, and a detailed account of Mrs. Albright's escalating threats. He sent it to the County Planning Commission, the State Historical Preservation Office, and even an investigative journalist he'd found online specializing in land development scandals. He knew it would be a long shot, but he had to start somewhere. The response was swift, but not from any official channel. The very next morning, the intimidation escalated. A dead crow appeared on their doorstep, its black feathers stark against the welcome mat. Later that day, Lily's bike tires were slashed in their driveway. Alex found passive-aggressive notes taped to his mailbox. Unsightly property. Troublemaker. Willow Creek doesn't tolerate pests. Then came the formal notice, not from the HOA, but from Sterling and Gray LLC, the HOA's legal firm. It was a temporary restraining order alleging harassment, defamation, and malicious intent to disrupt community harmony. It stipulated that Alex was forbidden from making any further public statements about the HOA or the Willow Creek Sanitarium, forbidden from further excavations, and forbidden from inciting unrest among residents. It was clearly designed to silence him. "They're getting desperate," Alex said, crushing the paper in his hand. "This means we're hitting a nerve." Sarah, though shaken, nodded. "It means they're scared. But we have to be smart, Alex. They're playing dirty." The journalist Alex had contacted, a grizzled veteran named Mark Thorne, finally called back. His voice was cautious. "Miller, I looked at your materials. It's compelling, disturbing even, but this is a big fish. Developers, powerful HOA. They'll have deep pockets and deeper connections. You'll need more than old maps and historical snippets. You'll need undeniable, verifiable physical proof." "What kind of proof?" Alex asked, his voice tight. "Something that links the land directly to the sanitarium's use as a burial ground. Something indisputable. Forensic evidence, maybe? Or—" Thorne paused. "Actual remains." The words hung in the air, a chilling suggestion. Alex knew what it meant. He had to dig again, but this time, not just for a plaque. He couldn't go through official channels for this. No permit would be granted for digging up potential human remains in a residential backyard. He would have to do it covertly under the cloak of night. That evening, as Willow Creek settled into its usual suburban quiet, Alex prepared. He borrowed a small, silent electric jackhammer from a friend, along with a discreet tarpaulin, forensic gloves, and sterile sample bags. He mapped out the precise area where Mr. Henderson's map indicated the cemetery plot extended onto his property right near the oak tree. The large, sprawling branches of the oak, once a source of conflict, now offered perfect cover. Sarah, pale but resolute, stood by him. "I'll keep watch," she whispered, handing him a thermos of coffee. "Lily's asleep. We have to be quick." Under the pale glow of a moon partially obscured by clouds, Alex began to work. The jackhammer was surprisingly quiet, its low thrum masked by the chirping of crickets and the occasional distant hum of a car. He worked methodically, carefully removing layers of soil, using a small hand trowel for finer work once he got deeper. Every scrape of metal against earth, every rustle of disturbed soil sounded amplified in the stillness of the night. He was deep, almost 7 feet down, past the main root system of the oak, when the air changed. A faint, earthy scent, something beyond just disturbed soil, began to waft up from the depths. His heart pounded. He switched off the jackhammer, and the sudden silence was deafening. He knelt, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the bottom of the trench. There, embedded in the dark, compacted earth, was a subtle change in texture, a darker stain that was too uniform to be natural. He scraped at it with his gloved hand, and then he saw it. Not bones, not yet, but something undeniably man-made, yet ancient. A fragment of thick, coarse cloth, a muted gray, clearly an old shroud or garment. And beneath it, a faint, discolored object that looked like a tarnished button, unlike anything modern. He swallowed hard, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't just a boundary marker, this was concrete. This was irrefutable. Just as he carefully placed the cloth fragment into a sterile bag, a beam of light sliced through the darkness, hitting him full in the face. "Miller! What in God's name do you think you're doing?" It was Mrs. Albright, standing at the edge of his property, flanked by Mr. Davies and Ms. Chen. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 3 men in dark suits, their faces grim and unreadable. One of them held the powerful flashlight. Alex scrambled out of the trench, heart hammering against his ribs. He immediately recognized the men from the local news. They were representatives from Evergreen Holdings, the developers who had built Willow Creek. They clearly had been tipped off, alerted to Alex's actions. "This is an outrage, Mr. Miller," Mrs. Albright shrieked, her voice shaking with a mixture of fury and genuine terror. "After the restraining order, you are deliberately trying to destroy this community." "I'm exposing your lies, Mrs. Albright," Alex retorted, holding up the sterile bag with the cloth fragment. "Your cover-up. This isn't just dirt down here. This is history. This is proof." Unmarked graves. The 3 men from Evergreen Holdings exchanged glances. One, a tall, impeccably dressed man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice calm, dangerously so. "You are tampering with private property. This land was legally acquired. Any claims of unmarked graves are unsubstantiated rumors." "Are they?" Alex challenged, his voice rising, emboldened by his discovery. "Because I just found evidence. This cloth, this button, this isn't natural. And I have an old survey map that explicitly marks this area as a former cemetery plot of the Willow Creek Sanitarium. A sanitarium with a history of abuses and disappeared patients. You built homes on top of a burial ground, and you've been covering it up ever since." The Evergreen Holdings representative's face remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed. "We advise you to cease and desist, Mr. Miller. Immediately. You are risking serious legal repercussions, including felony charges for desecration of property and public disturbance." "You're threatening me?" Alex scoffed. "Because I found what you tried to hide? You built your empire on a lie, on a graveyard." "We offered Mr. Henderson a fair price for his land and a non-disclosure," Mrs. Albright interjected, her voice regaining some of its former steel. "He took it. The past is the past. There is no benefit to anyone to bring this up, only chaos and destruction of property values." "No benefit?" Alex yelled, the adrenaline making him reckless. "What about the truth? What about the dignity of those buried here?" Suddenly, the night erupted. Sirens, louder this time, wailed in the distance, growing rapidly closer, not just one, but several. It was a calculated move by the HOA and Evergreen Holdings, not merely to stop him, but to make an example of him. The first police car skidded to a halt, then another, and another. Officer Reynolds and Officer Davies were among the officers who emerged, their faces grim. This time, they were accompanied by plain-clothes detectives. Mrs. Albright stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger at Alex. "There he is, officers! Violent, unstable. He's desecrating property, trying to dig up ancient rumors. We have a restraining order. He resisted, he threatened us, and he's clearly unhinged." Her voice was a desperate crescendo, amplified by the sudden floodlights from the police vehicles. The Evergreen Holdings representative added, "He's causing significant damage to this community, officers. This is a direct violation of civil order." Alex stood his ground, the sterile bag with the cloth fragment held aloft. "I have proof. They built this community on a mass grave. They knew about it, and they covered it up." Officer Reynolds looked at the bag, then at the deep, open trench, and finally at the array of powerful, well-dressed figures arrayed against Alex. His gaze lingered on Mrs. Albright, whose frantic desperation was evident. "Mr. Miller." "Officer," Reynolds said, his voice regretful but firm. "We have a warrant for your arrest, based on violations of the restraining order, public disturbance, and alleged property desecration. You need to come with us." Alex looked from the officers to Sarah, who... The flash of police lights painted the Miller home in stark, unforgiving shadows as Alex was led away in handcuffs. His last glimpse was of Sarah, standing on their porch, frozen in the glare, her face a mask of terror and disbelief. Lily's bedroom light remained on, an innocent beacon in the unfolding nightmare. The smug, triumphant expressions of Mrs. Albright and the Evergreen Holdings executives were etched into his memory, a potent fuel for the fury now simmering beneath his forced calm. At the station, the air was thick with bureaucratic indifference. Alex was processed, his sterile bag containing the cloth fragment meticulously logged as evidence. The detectives, two men with tired eyes and a professional detachment, grilled him. They repeated the accusations: violation of a restraining order, public disturbance, property desecration. Alex, despite his exhaustion, explained everything, detailing the HOA's escalating harassment, the historical sanitarium, the plaque, and finally the discovery of the cloth fragment and old button. He even mentioned Mr. Henderson and the survey map. They listened, impassive, occasionally jotting notes. It was clear they were more interested in the immediate charges than in unearthing a decades-old corporate cover-up. "Mr. Miller," one detective said, his voice flat, "we appreciate your cooperation, but these are serious charges. The sanitarium claims, while intriguing, are beyond our current jurisdiction on a simple property dispute." "Simple property dispute?" Alex retorted, leaning forward. "They ordered police to shoot if I resisted, over a tree, and I found evidence of a mass grave." The detectives exchanged a look. "We have Mrs. Albright's statement. She claims you were acting erratically, threatening the safety of others. As for the shoot comment, she claims it was a figure of speech, a hyperbolic expression of her fear." Alex scoffed. They were already controlling the narrative. He was being painted as the unstable aggressor, Mrs. Albright as the frightened victim. He knew he had to hold on to his conviction. "I have proof. The plaque. And what I found tonight. That wasn't just dirt." They released him on bail the following morning, arranged by a stunned and distraught Sarah, who had spent a sleepless night making frantic calls. The sun, usually a welcome sight, felt like an interrogation lamp. Willow Creek, once their sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. Every rustle of leaves seemed to carry whispers. Every car that slowed past their house felt like an accusation. Sarah, though visibly shaken, was furious. "How could they? They arrested you, the victim." She paced their living room, clutching the still secure original survey map that Alex had, entrusted to her before his second digging attempt. "They're trying to crush us, Alex." "They are," Alex agreed, rubbing his temples. The indignity of the arrest, the cold cells, the dismissive attitude of the police only solidified his resolve. "But we have the truth, and we have to get it out there. Remember Mark Thorne, the journalist? Call him. Tell him everything. Tell him I have physical evidence now. Tell him they arrested me for finding it." Sarah wasted no time. She contacted Mark Thorne, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage as she recounted the night's events. Thorne listened, his usual, caution replaced by a sharp, urgent interest. "They arrested him? For that? Okay, Sarah, this changes everything. This isn't just a local dispute anymore. This is a story, a big one. Can you get me that evidence? The cloth, the button, whatever else he found? And that map." "The police confiscated the fragment," Sarah explained. "But I have the map, and Alex says he remembers exactly where he found the cloth. He's an engineer, he's meticulous." Thorne paused. Okay, that's a problem. We need something undeniable. Something that can't be dismissed as dirt. If they've confiscated it, they'll bury it in police evidence, or worse, discredit it. I need something fresh, something I can verify independently. Alex, listening in, knew what Thorne meant. They needed more. Something undeniable, something new that the police didn't have. He realized his original desperate strategy of digging himself was flawed in the face of such powerful opponents. He needed experts, and he needed public attention. The ripple effect of Alex's arrest was immediate and profound within Willow Creek. The HOA, through Mrs. Albright, circulated an official email, a carefully worded masterpiece of corporate speak. It described Alex's actions as disturbing and antisocial, emphasizing the damage to community aesthetics and safety, and vaguely alluding to mental health concerns. It subtly implied that his claims about the sanitarium were baseless delusions, the actions of a disgruntled homeowner trying to avoid legitimate fines. But the whispers grew louder than the HOA's carefully constructed narrative. Residents who had seen the police cars, heard the sirens, or witnessed Mrs. Albright's frantic demeanor began to talk. The children, quick to pick up on adult anxieties, started asking their parents about Mr. Miller's big hole. The sanitarium, once a forgotten ghost, was suddenly a forbidden topic, spoken in hushed tones behind closed doors. Some residents, those who remembered Mr. Henderson's earlier warnings or had heard the persistent rumors, started to look at their manicured lawns with a new, unsettling sense of dread. Mrs. Albright, however, doubled down. She convened an emergency HOA meeting, painting Alex as a pariah, a threat to their property values and idyllic lives. She introduced a motion to legally pursue a permanent injunction against Alex, effectively forbidding him from further disturbing his property or engaging in any disruptive behavior that could negatively impact community well-being. The motion passed, though not unanimously. A few brave souls abstained, their faces pale, their silence speaking volumes. Meanwhile, Alex and Sarah felt the full weight of their isolation. Their former friends suddenly had prior engagements. Invitations stopped coming. Lily was subtly excluded from playdates. It was a cold, effective campaign of social ostracism designed to break them, but it only strengthened their resolve. They had to be smarter. They had to use their knowledge of the system against itself. Alex remembered a former colleague from his engineering firm, Dr. Lena Hansen, a brilliant geologist specializing in ground-penetrating radar and environmental surveys. She had a reputation for integrity and an unwavering commitment to scientific truth. He knew she wouldn't be easily intimidated. He called her, explaining the convoluted story. Lena, intrigued and disturbed, agreed to meet them discreetly. She arrived at their house late one evening, her equipment packed into an unmarked van. After reviewing Mr. Henderson's map and Alex's account, her professional curiosity was piqued. "This is fascinating, Alex," Lena said, her eyes scanning the old map. "If this cemetery plot extends into the common area and they buried a spring, then the subsurface conditions would be complex. And if there are indeed unmarked graves, then any modern construction over them would be a massive ethical and potentially legal liability. Can you confirm it?" Alex asked, gesturing to the filled-in trench. "Without digging, if possible? And definitively link it to the sanitarium?" Lena nodded. "With advanced GPR and some soil analysis, we might be able to detect anomalies consistent with disturbed ground, buried structures, or even organic decomposition at specific depths. It won't be as clear as a shovel hitting a coffin, but it'll be scientific, and harder for them to dismiss as delusions." Under the guise of a soil stability test, requested by Alex after his previous landscaping mishap, Lena began her work in their backyard a few days later, always at off-peak hours. She meticulously scanned the ground, focusing not just on Alex's property, but subtly extending her scans onto the edges of the public green belt where it met their yard. Her GPR unit, far more sophisticated than Alex's rental, produced detailed subsurface images. What she found was startling. The GPR images clearly showed multiple, distinct anomalies beneath the green belt and extending into Alex's property. These weren't random rock formations or typical utility lines. They were rectangular, consistent in size and depth, arranged in rows. And beneath them, a larger, more diffuse signature, consistent with a diverted underground water source. Precisely, where Mr. Henderson's map indicated the buried spring. The containment system Sarah had theorized now looked chillingly real. "Alex," Lena said, her voice hushed as she showed him the readouts on her laptop. "These patterns, they are highly consistent with buried structures, approximately 6 to 7 feet deep. Given the historical context you provided and the specific arrangement, it's very likely these are graves, unmarked, individual plots. And this larger signature, that's a significant underground water flow, likely managed by an extensive, non-standard subsurface drainage system." It was the undeniable, verifiable physical proof Mark Thorne had demanded. Not just a piece of cloth, but scientific data, showing the precise location and nature of the buried secrets. Armed with Lena's data, Alex and Sarah met with Mark Thorne again, this time in a discreet coffee shop miles away from Willow Creek. Thorne, his eyes alight with journalistic fervor, pored over the GPR images and Lena's accompanying report. "This is it," Thorne whispered, his voice low with excitement. "This is the smoking gun. Scientific evidence that validates your claims. We can't be dismissed as cranks anymore. This is actionable. This is a scandal." He outlined his plan. Break the story in the local paper first, then pitch it to a larger regional or even national investigative team. The quiet hum of Willow Creek was shattered on a Tuesday morning, not by sirens or angry shouts, but by the rustle of newsprint. Mark Thorne's investigative piece, emblazoned across the front page of the regional daily, hit like a seismic shockwave. The headline screamed, "Suburban idyll, grim secret, Willow Creek built on forgotten sanitarium graves?" The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. It laid bare the Willow Creek Sanitarium's dark history, the suspicious land acquisitions by Evergreen Holdings, the damning details from Mr. Henderson's survey map, and most powerfully, Lena Hansen's scientific GPR data, presented with clear, undeniable images of the rectangular anomalies consistent with buried structures. It meticulously recounted Alex Miller's struggle, the HOA's aggressive tactics, Mrs. Albright's chilling shoot-if-they-resist order, and his unjust arrest. The police's confiscation of the initial fragment was framed as a suspicious attempt to suppress evidence. The response was immediate and explosive. Local news channels picked up the story, sending camera crews swarming into Willow Creek. Reporters converged on the Miller residence, though Alex and Sarah, on Mark Thorne's advice, remained inside, issuing a statement through him. Mrs. Albright's phone rang off the hook. Evergreen Holdings stock plummeted as investors panicked. The carefully constructed illusion of Willow Creek, once a symbol of suburban perfection, crumbled under the weight of its grim history. The first tangible consequence came swiftly. The local district attorney, facing immense public pressure, announced a full investigation into Evergreen Holdings' land acquisition practices and the Willow Creek HOA. Officer Reynolds, clearly embarrassed and now armed with indisputable evidence, issued a public statement clarifying Alex's arrest, hinting at a larger ongoing inquiry into Mrs. Albright's conduct. The charges against Alex were quietly dropped. The community of Willow Creek was in an uproar. Neighbors who had once shunned Alex and Sarah now stood awkwardly on their sidewalks, murmuring apologies, their faces a mix of shame and dawning horror. The young mother who had left the note in their mailbox, a woman named Emily, was among the first to openly approach them. "We had no idea, Alex," she said, her eyes brimming. "We're so sorry. We'll help you." A few days later, a makeshift memorial began to appear on the edge of the green belt, near the spot where Alex had found the plaque. Small stones, withered flowers, and simple handwritten notes of remembrance for the forgotten souls. Residents, some tearful, walked the grounds, no longer seeing manicured grass but a hidden tragedy. The HOA, reeling, held another emergency meeting, but this time the atmosphere was different. The silent observers from the previous meeting found their voices. One by one, residents stood up, their questions laced with anger and betrayal. "Mrs. Albright," a longtime resident demanded, his voice shaking, "did you know about the sanitarium? About the graves?" Mrs. Albright, her usual composure utterly gone, tried to maintain her authority. "These are unfounded allegations. This is simply Mr. Miller trying to stir up trouble." "Unfounded?" another neighbor shouted, holding up the newspaper. "This newspaper has GPR images. It says scientific evidence. What about the containment system? What about the diverted spring?" The meeting devolved into chaos. Mrs. Albright, pale and visibly sweating, was cornered. Mr. Davies and Ms. Chen, her former enforcers, sat silently, avoiding eye contact. Their loyalty evaporated in the face of public outrage. The turning point came when a woman, a retired teacher, stood up. "My cousin," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "was admitted to the Willow Creek Sanitarium in 1952. She was never heard from again. My family was told she wandered off. We never knew what happened to her. Could she be here?" Her question resonated through the room, cutting through the anger and shifting the focus to the human cost of the cover-up. Mrs. Albright, unable to withstand the collective gaze, finally broke. Her carefully constructed facade shattered. She stammered, I was only following orders. Evergreen Holdings. They told us. It was all legally cleared." Her confession, though incomplete, was enough. A motion for her immediate resignation was proposed and passed overwhelmingly. Mr. Davies and Ms. Chen resigned on the spot, fleeing the angry crowd. The reign of the iron-fisted HOA was over. The investigation intensified. Forensic archaeologists, brought in by the county, began initial surveys of the green belt. The findings were grim. The GPR data was confirmed. Human remains were indeed present, meticulously arranged in rows, just as Lena Hansen's report had indicated. The diverted spring, flowing unnaturally beneath the planned community, hinted at a desperate attempt to keep the past buried and prevent any natural disturbances. Fallout for Evergreen Holdings was catastrophic. Lawsuits began to pile up. From former patients' families, from residents whose property values plummeted, from the county for potential environmental and historical violations. The company faced a class action lawsuit for deceptive practices and a criminal investigation for knowingly building on an unmarked burial site without proper disclosure or mitigation. Their once pristine reputation was in tatters, their future uncertain. Mrs. Albright herself faced charges, not just for her role in the HOA's harassment of Alex, but for potential obstruction of justice and conspiracy in the larger cover-up. Her "shoot if they resist" comment, once dismissed as hyperbole, was now seen as a chilling indicator of the lengths she would go to protect the secret, knowing the potential implications if the graves were uncovered. She was arrested, this time not for a civil dispute, but for her involvement in a scandal that shook the very foundations of Willow Creek. As the weeks turned into months, Willow Creek underwent a profound transformation. The meticulously manicured lawns seemed less important now. The community rallied, not around bylaws, but around a shared desire for truth and remembrance. A fund was established to properly memorialize the forgotten souls buried beneath their homes, and discussions began about how to ethically redevelop or preserve the affected areas. Alex and Sarah, once pariahs, were now community heroes. Their oak tree, the unlikely catalyst for this revolution, stood tall and proud in their yard, a silent testament to their unwavering fight. Lily, unaware of the full gravity, now called the tree the truth tree, and her fort beneath it was a symbol of quiet defiance. One afternoon, Alex stood by his oak, watching forensic teams carefully working on the green belt, now a site of solemn archaeological excavation rather than casual recreation. Mark Thorne had become a friend, Lena Hansen, a trusted ally, and Mr. Henderson, a local legend. The community, though scarred, was slowly healing, forged anew by the crucible of truth. He thought of Mrs. Albright, now facing a justice system she had once so ruthlessly wielded. He thought of Evergreen Holdings, its empire crumbling. And he thought of the unknown individuals, finally resting in peace, their stories brought to light by one man's refusal to back down. The sun set over Willow Creek, casting long shadows. It wasn't the perfect, sterile vision Mrs. Albright had curated, but it was real, flawed, scarred, but finally, truly free. The truth, once buried, had risen, and its reckoning had come. That concludes The Buried Truth. It was quite a journey, wasn't it? We saw Alex go from a frustrated homeowner to an unlikely hero, uncovering a profound secret and bringing a powerful corporation and a tyrannical HOA to justice. I hope you found the ending satisfying, with justice prevailing and the community beginning to heal. What are your thoughts on how the story concluded? Is there anything you'd like to explore further? Perhaps a prequel, a side story, or even a different kind of narrative altogether?